Hello! Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time seeing my face, hello. My name is Gabby and I am so happy to have you here. Today we are going over my 5-star reading recommendations so you can kind of get to know my taste a little, see if you want to take some of my recommendations and just some of the books that I loved and I literally cannot stop talking about to everybody who asks me for a book recommendation. They're all right here. So, this is my Kindle. We're actually not going to do this first because I don't want to. But we're just going to jump right into it. So, the first is The Martian by Andy Weir. This, I have grown to hate the fact that it has like the now major motion picture and also Matt Damon's face. And I've never understood why people have multiple copies of the same book. And then I saw the alternate cover for this book and I understand why. But that's literally besides the point. This is in the sci-fi genre. The Martian, basically what happens is that this crew gets sent by NASA to the planet Mars, and while they're there, there's a dust storm, and the crew has to leave, but Mark Watney, who's the main character, gets left behind because he can't make it back to like their shuttle in time, and if they didn't leave like right then and there, they would all die. So they had to leave him behind. But lucky for Mark Watney, even though he's stranded on Mars, he is a botanist, which is a plant scientist, for those of you that are unfamiliar. So this book kind of goes to the journey of him kind of establishing his home on Mars and trying to basically stay alive while they try and figure out a rescue mission to get him back. I adore this book because Andy Weir has such an amazing sense of humor. For example, when you colonize a planet or kind of anywhere, you get to determine what everything's called, and you also get to decide the unit of measure that the place that you're colonizing uses. And so Mark Watney decides to measure everything in pirate ninjas. So it's just an example of how funny Andy Weir is. If you've watched this movie, it is such a close adaptation of this book. So if you watched the movie and you liked it, you are going to love this book. There is a little bit of heavy science in this, but it's something that you kind of can't get through. So for the first one, that's my pick. The next is going to make me sound so pretentious, but it's literally my favorite book in the whole world. It is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This is a romance. This is an enemies to lovers, and I eat it up every time. I believe it's set in the 1800s. So basically, the main character, Elizabeth, is part of this family, and she lives in a family of 5 sisters, and in this time, you had to get married off, girl. Like, there was no other choice. Like, you either were poor after your dad died, or you got married to a man who had money. So it kind of goes through their family story and her relationship to all of her other sisters, and one of her sisters is being courted by this fancy schmancy man. Fancy schmancy. Wow. Okay. By this fancy dude. And his best friend is Mr. Darcy, and he honestly is so mean. And that's where the enemies to lovers comes in. So it kind of goes through Elizabeth's life and her connection to Darcy. Because it's set in the 1800s, their version of romantic tension was like holding hands and like not being able to hold hands. So the slow burn in this it's so good. It's so good. So definitely recommend this. It's obviously harder to read because it's classic lit, but if you're up for the challenge, the quotes in this book they're nuts. We'll go to my Kindle now before we switch into new genres. I don't know if you guys can see it because I have my brightness low. Let me turn it up. We'll turn it up. My next recommendation, let me see if I can pull up the title page. I literally should have done this before I started filming this video. Oh, that's the preview for the next book. Sorry, I still don't know how to use my Kindle. Oh, okay, yes, I don't need a tutorial. Well, maybe I do. I just need to see I want to go to the first page. Cover. Ha! Okay, so. Is it going to go away? Is it going to let me stay here? Okay, so my next recommendation, if you can see it, is Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. It is the second book in the original Hunger Games trilogy. She just came out with a 4th book, so there's 4 books in that series now, but I've only read the original 3. Catching Fire, y'all, it is so good. It is dystopian. And, you know, Hunger Games has been out for years, so I'm sure everybody knows. But basically, the way that the first book goes is that they live in the society that used to be North America, and then it got split up into districts, and this one district tried to rebel against their, like, essentially their government, their capital, and then they lost. So as a punishment, they have to do this thing called the Hunger Games, where you send a tribute from each district to literally fight to the death, which is nuts. So that's kind of the premise. We're following Katniss. She's our main character. I'm not going to get too much into the plot of the book in case you haven't read Hunger Games for some reason. But the first book does a really good job of kind of story building. You know what? Screw it. Spoiler alert. So I'll put a timestamp to where you can go if you don't want to hear the spoilers of the first book. But we already know that Katniss played the Hunger Games. She won the Hunger Games, whatever. In this second book, it's the 75th year of the Hunger Games. So every I guess quarter quell. Yeah, they call it the quarter quell. So quarterly they have a special Hunger Games that has like new rules or a special twist or something like that. And the twist for this quarter quell is that both of the tributes have to be pooled from the people who already won, which is nuts. But this book dives a little bit more into the politics of the Hunger Games, and which is why I really liked it. You really now kind of understand Katniss more as a character, and the love triangle that's developed is way more developed and more intense. So I'm obsessed with it. 5 stars. The next is Verity by Colleen Hoover. Colleen Hoover is, you either like her or you don't. I've never read any of her other books, but I loved Verity. It is a thriller. It is a little spicy, which is not my favorite, but honestly, I just skip it. But Verity is so good. It is about this woman, Lowen, and she is getting hired as a ghostwriter for, she doesn't know for who yet, but essentially what happened is that she's hired as a ghostwriter by this very famous author's husband. And because the author is incapacitated, her husband hires Lowen on to ghostwrite her new book. But, like, it's kind of weird because they invite Lowen to go, like, live at the author's house. And the whole book kind of centers around, like, weird things that happen with the incapacitated wife. And it's really, honestly, kind of spooky. But this book was so good. I made the mistake of reading it while I was taking finals in undergrad. And so I was supposed to be studying, but I had started the book because I was really excited to read it. And I could not put it down. It was all I could think about all day. So I literally sped read through it. And I binged it so I could focus on my finals because I could not focus on anything else. This book keeps you on the edge of your seat the entire time. And so I really, really, really liked it. Obviously, I really liked it. That's why it's a 5-star. Duh. The next, which is also a thriller, is The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides, whatever. What happens here is that Alicia Berenson is this really famous artist, and basically what happens is that one day she goes nutso and unalives her husband. Then she doesn't talk for the next 7 years. So this book is written from the point of view of her therapist, her psychoanalyst, something like that. Let me see if it says it on the back. Oh, yes, criminal psychotherapist, Theo. And so it's basically he's trying to get her to talk again and trying to understand what led her up to this point to not speaking for the past 7 years. Unfortunately for him, Alicia's super volatile. Like, every time he talks to her, she tries to gouge his eyes out. But the twist in this book was insane. I literally audibly gasped when I was reading it. I definitely wouldn't recommend it for people who have, like, never read the thriller genre before because there's a lot of buildup for this. So it takes you kind of have to, like, soldier through it in the beginning. But I love this. The next book is People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. This is my first Emily Henry read, and I obviously really liked it, so I'm looking forward to reading some of her other books. But basically what happened is that Poppy and Alex are best friends. They have always hung out, even though they're kind of like an unlikely pairing, but they're best friends, and she works for I believe a travel magazine, so she gets to go on these fancy vacations every year, and so she always brings Alex as her +1, and so you see it kind of starts from a previous timeline, so you see how close they are as friends and all these things, but then they haven't spoken 2 years. Yeah, they haven't spoken in 2 years. So you're like, what the heck happened between them? So yeah, you're trying to see how Poppy kind of navigates she's kind of having a career slump, so you kind of navigate where she kind of wants to go in her life, and you get to see that. You also get to see her relationship with Alex and how that either builds or doesn't build. The banter in this book is so good. Something about this, I was eating it up. So, love this one. It's also a very easy read, so super beach read, but super easy if you want to just casually read on vacation. The next one is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This is a fantasy. However, I would consider this, so high fantasy is when there's like a very intricate world built within the fantasy universe. I would consider this low fantasy. I don't know if that's a term or if I just made it up, but that's what I would call it. So I would consider this low fantasy because this also takes place in the real world. So basically Jude has grown up. It's not a spoiler because it's in like the first chapter, I think. But Jude has grown up in, the real world that you and I live in. And then one day this green man comes to her house and unalives her parents. And you're like, what the H? Turns out her mother came from this fairy world. Not fairy with a Y, fairy with an I-E, which I believe is just a term for fantasy world. And so her I guess technically her dad, yeah, he's her dad. Her real dad, who's this fairy dude, comes and takes her back to the fairy world. So she is now a mortal growing up in a immortal fantasy world that's full of magic and all these things. This has a subplot of romance. It is an enemies to lovers romance, so obviously, as you can tell, I eat that up. But what I really liked about this is that it's centered less on the romance and more on Jude's power struggle, you could call it, because she's trying to figure out her place in this world. She's trying to navigate kind of how she fits into this immortal world. She's been growing up in it for a few years, and so her father is the head of this world's army, and so she's always wanted to be a knight, and so you kind of try and see this power struggle as she kind of fights against all of the odds, but it's not necessarily in the Herculean fighting against all the odds, but more in the sense of a political, these are the standards of this world, and she's kind of fighting against norms in some sense. But the power struggle also exists within herself, so allowing herself to feel certain emotions and allowing herself to kind of experience these feelings that she's kind of pushed away because she's forced herself to be very strong for her family and for her sister. So I really liked this book as well. And then the next two are kind of unexpected because they're cookbooks. I don't know if you could count these as 5-star because I don't rate cookbooks, but I love these two chefs and subsequently cookbook authors. The first one is less of a book and more of a cookbook, and it is Cook This Book by Molly Boz. I love all of these recipes. It's a beautiful book, and it is so easy to follow. It's visually beautiful, and the way that she lays it out is that it has the title, all of the ingredients that you'll need, a brief description, and then all of the steps. The steps are so intuitive. I find a lot of times cookbooks tend to give you the way you would make it if you were almost in a professional kitchen. Obviously these people are very seasoned cooks, and so they tend to kind of skip over all of the basic steps of I don't know, chop your onion this way. It'll just say chop onion. You're like, well, how much onion? I don't know. But Molly does a really good job of making it also time effective. So she'll even put in her recipes while this is boiling on the stove, go cut this so that it's ready by the time this is done. So love this book, highly recommend. She also just came out with a new book, it's available for pre-order, and I can't remember what it's called, but it has a red cover. So definitely follow her on Instagram and read this. The next and last is Nothing Fancy by Alison Roman. This is more of a book. So Alison Roman used to be a contributor to New York Times Cooking. So let me see if I can find one. Her descriptions are so literary. Her tone of voice is so funny and descriptive, and you read it and you're like, this woman is my friend. And honestly, she's so personable and realistic. So some of her recipes, she's like, you could do it this way, but I wouldn't do that if I was making it because that sounds like a waste of time and it's hard. So we're not going to do it that way. And all of her recipes are fantastic, so I definitely recommend this cookbook as well. Nothing Fancy by Alison. Follow her on Instagram. Watch her on YouTube. Home movies. Love them. But that is all. I mean, I guess another one of my favorite series is the Harry Potter series. I wouldn't say that all of them are 5-star, but they're some of my favorite series as well. Some of my favorite books as well, sorry. But yeah, that is it for all of my 5-star reads and some of my favorite books. So I'm so glad that you watched all the way to this point. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss a thing every time I post. You can also follow me on Instagram at bookswithbloom. It is just a W instead of a with, so it's bookswbloom on Instagram. I post my weekly reads. I post kind of more about my life, the things I eat, the things I wear, the things I do, everything like that. So make sure you go follow me on there as well. And that is all. Bye. Can I zoom? Oh.